Well, I hope that you've enjoyed our stream as we've shared with you John chapter 19 and part of chapter 20, as we've shared with you John's viewpoint of the cross, and especially this woman, Mary Magdalene, who interacts both at the cross with John and also at the tomb. John gives a very unique testimony that comes into play here on resurrection morning. You see, of all the other gospel writers, they write 85 to 90% about what happens with Jesus and his teaching in the area of Galilee or outside Jerusalem. John specifically writes about 90% of his gospel comes from the area of Jerusalem and its surrounding area, like Bethany. John wants to get across a testimony that is possibly missed by the other gospel writers. And John is the last writer to write a gospel. We're told by 2nd and 3rd century testimony from the church fathers that John was encouraged by other disciples and followers of Jesus to write the things that he was talking about and to write the things that he remembered. And what John did, according to this testimony, was that John asked them to fast and pray with him for 3 days because this was so vital and so important to him. And so they fasted for 3 days, and out of this birthed John writing his gospel. And the Holy Spirit inspired some new and different things that from what we see in the synoptic gospels. And John very clearly talks about this idea of receiving or rejecting the Messiah. John chapter 1 says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In fact, He, who is Jesus, who is the Word, created all things. There was nothing made that had not been made. Jesus made everything. So he declares himself to be the one who creates and the one who is with God. And the very word, the speech of God speaking to us. We find in verse 4 that in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And then farther on in the chapter, in John chapter 1, it says this, that he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. But to as many as received him, to those he gave power to become the children of God. Children who are birthed not by flesh and blood or by the will of man, but are birthed by the Spirit of God, birthed by God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. These are things that John is getting across through his whole gospel. Now as we come to Jerusalem and this time of Passover and the resurrection now, we find that John is bringing across the same message. There are some who have rejected him, but there are some who have received him. And now in chapters 19 we see him taking this woman, Mary Magdalene, a woman who comes from Galilee, and seeing the interaction of Mary, one who received him, and what happens on resurrection morning. I am reminded as I read through this that Mary also gives us a very unique interaction with Jesus that we don't see anywhere else. Of all the men and women who interact with Jesus after he rises from the dead and before he ascends, Mary brings us a testimony that I think is vitally important and brings us some strong theology.